Are you concerned about the impact smartphones and social media are having on kids today? Unsure if the amount of structure we have placed in their lives is really the best thing for them? This month, we interview social psychologist Dr. Valerie Hill to hear her advice on these topics that are top of mind for parents and educators. Welcome to the Raising Resilient Kids podcast, where we provide parents, teachers, and coaches with ideas and strategies to help kids and teens build their resilience and achieve their potential in a healthy, fulfilling way. Hello, sister.
Hello there, brother.
Can you believe it's season 1 finale?
No, I cannot. The year went so fast. This is totally wild.
It did. Thank you so much for doing this with me over the past year. We got to hear from so many different cool people. It was fantastic.
We really did. But what I want to ask you is, I want you to go back to 17-year-old you. I'm 5 years old. I'm sitting at the top of the stairs, wishing that you would hang out with me. You never wanted to hang out with me. Did you ever think that all these years later, you would be doing something like this with me?
No, if Pete wouldn't have declined me, I wouldn't have been doing it with you.
For those that don't know, Pete's our older brother who is only 3 years younger than Tom. And you're right, Pete is better than I am anyway. So he would be the better co-host. But alas, I'm the last sibling you have left. So I'm the only other choice.
No, you were perfect for this.
It's so funny just thinking back to how time changes relationships and stuff like that. And again, when I was a kid, you were just like my big brother and you had your own life. And I remember being a little kid and telling you, you go out way too much. You know, you're always out. You always are leaving. And I remember you telling me, when you're a teenager, you're going to do the same thing. And you were right.
Yes. Yeah. And we didn't go out that much. It wasn't too much. Linda used to come over all the time.
Well, yes. I mean, when you are born a Klishevitz, you don't like to leave your house. So most of the time you do want people coming over. So you're right. You didn't leave that much, but you did always have people over. You were always busy.
That's true. And what's funny is our guest today was one of those people who was probably over when I was 17 and you were 5 and you were looking down at us. And I was shocked when I found out that she's a social psychologist.
You are totally right. I love how you magically fell upon this person from your past. I think you all are really going to enjoy hearing the story that led us to this interview today.
Absolutely. Let's just jump into the podcast then. So our question of the month actually comes from one of the recent classes that I taught. I was teaching a bunch of teachers and social workers and school support staff. And there was a pretty lively debate over whether or not today's technology is either helpful or harmful to our students' social development, the kids' social development in general.
Sure.
So I thought that'd be a great question to cover in this podcast and bring an expert in. Mm-hmm. And today's guest was actually the very first recommendation I got for the podcast.
Okay, that's cool.
So I've been working with Dr. Hannah Klein from Lewis University. She had listened to podcasts and she said she liked it. And I said, do you know anybody? And she said, yes. And I'll actually read the quote that she sent me. I pulled up the email.
Okay.
She said, we have a professor here at Lewis, Valerie Hill, who teaches all of our childhood development psychology classes. Plus, she's an incredible mom herself. And she's also a licensed parent coach.
Wow. Okay.
So I was like, perfect. But then I heard the name Valerie Hill and I'm like, could that be the Valerie Hill that was in many of my homecoming and prom groups in high school?
It couldn't have been.
So, of course, I go directly to the Lewis University site. And sure enough, who is it? But it's Valerie Hill. And it is the Valerie Hill from high school who, if there's a podcast on how not to age in 30 years, she should be on that because there was no question. She looks exactly the same as she did 30 years ago. So this was exciting. So I was excited to reach out to her. Dr. Valerie Hill is a developmental psychologist who enjoys teaching psychology courses and workshops that explore various aspects of human development, adolescence, parenting, friendship, Alzheimer's disease. She is a professor and the undergraduate program director in the psychology department at Lewis University and the author of the books Inside Diseases and Disorders, What You Need to Know About Alzheimer's Disease, and the one that makes her the perfect guest for our question this month, which is right here, Hanging Out the Psychology of Socializing. So, Valerie, it is so good to see you again. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I can't lie. I do feel like I sort of feel a little bit like I'm with the celebrity only because I was a very little girl and I distinctly remember I probably have photos of me standing in front of you and Linda and Tom and all these pretty people and wanting to be grown up. And I'm like, oh my gosh, look, we're both adults now. Like, wow.
I know, right? How time flies,
It
Crazy.
It's,
does.
yeah.
It's
Yeah, I think
just
I have
crazy.
photos as well. Those were good times. Thank
Yeah.
you for having me.
Awesome. Well, Valerie, what do you if you would go in, what do you think on that? Is technology good or bad for our kids' socialization?
It's a really good question. With psychology, I actually think it's both. I know some students don't like hearing sometimes like it depends, but that's really what it is with technology. And I want to clarify, I think when we think of technology nowadays, I think most people think of phones and social media and whatnot.
Sure.
But technology in general is just any sort of way that makes our life different in some sort of respect. So let me give you an example, like the car. I mean, think about it before we had cars or before we had washing machines. I think each generation has had some sort of technology that has impacted it in some sort of way. I think one of the ways that technology nowadays would happen would be the smartphone, right? And I think one way that it could be helpful is it allows us to connect to people that maybe we wouldn't be able to connect to, or maybe maintain a connection that we wouldn't normally maintain. And I'll give you an example. When I was younger, I had a friend in second grade, and she actually left school, and she was one of my best friends. And so we began writing letters to each other. And then over time, what happened? The letters became less frequent, and then the letters stopped and really lost that connection to that friend.
Mhm.
But my daughter, who's in seventh grade, had one of her really good friends move to the Philippines recently. And they are able to stay connected. There's I think, 13 or 14-hour time difference, and they can instant message. They can see each other through whatever platform that they have. So I think that way it can be very helpful for us to either develop or maintain connections with others. It might also let us take risks that we normally wouldn't take. Maybe you can take a risk in a video game or an app that maybe you wouldn't take in real life. So
Sure.
I think those are two just helpful ways. I think potentially harmful ways is that we use it sometimes to occupy children's time
Yes.
or entertain them as we do adult things, let's just say. But think about it. Back in the day, as children, we did those things with adults. We went to the grocery store and we didn't have something in front of our face. And so, one of those things, when you were talking about social development, I really think we're kind of losing some of those basic developmental, I don't want to call them milestones, but aspects of development that used to really help us. I mean, I'll give you an example. We were at a restaurant, probably a year ago, and there was a big group of individuals, and everybody was on their phone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Adults,
Yeah.
children, none of them were interacting with each other. And so it's kind of like, how do you learn how to be out socially at a restaurant or some other things if you're not having to do that at a young age? Or even in the grocery store? Language is very important. Have them help you. You have a list, have them find things in the grocery store for you, help you. Yeah, it's going to take a
Great idea.
little longer to get through the grocery store, but those are some aspects that are really important for children to develop language, conversation. They see how you interact with others,
Sure.
maybe at, the bakery or the meat counter or whatnot, and they're picking up those kind of social interactions and they're learning from you. So I think that would be a potential harm in that I think sometimes we're losing some of the social encounters that we maybe experienced when we were kids that kids don't, nowadays as much.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's something that I didn't even think about is those real life normal experiences of just basic interactions. Kids are missing them now because they're busy watching YouTube, on their phone. And
Right.
instead of trying to keep them quiet, you really want them more to be interacting.
And I mean, it's hard. I know, our lives are busy. You want to get in and get out and, do everything, but it could be fun too, to be able to have them do that with you. And one of the things that I don't know if you guys know Jean Twenge's research. Do you know her research?
Nope.
Okay.
Yeah.
So she has really done a lot of work on generational differences and how technology has shaped development. And, everybody, when we think of kids and teens, everybody kind of highlights COVID, right? With social development, COVID. But actually, what the research is showing is that in about 2012, when everybody had a smartphone, so smartphones kind of were introduced, in like roughly 2007-ish,
Yeah.
but in 2012, most people had one. And what we're really finding from research regarding children and more so adolescents is that because of that, they're doing a lot less things that you and I did. Like, for example, getting a driver's license. I mean, I can remember. I mean, how about you guys? We counted the days, who got their driver's
Yeah.
license first, who could pick us up.
Totally.
Now it's like, not a lot of them have a, driver's license to do that.
True.
Going out on dates, a lot less go out on dates than,
Yeah.
you used to. And then going out without parents has actually declined. We used to go out without our parents a lot. So think about those three things that we all did that, children and teens aren't really doing as much. And think about you're not really gaining that independence or social interaction with your peers, which is
Sure.
a
Yeah.
different social interaction than with adults, right? And I think it really highlights again this idea of technology and, maybe some of the potential impacts that it can have.
In that conversation that we were having in that class, it did talk a lot about social media in general and stuff like
Yeah.
that. Do you have any recommendations, advice, any of the research out there about is social media okay? Because I think about my son. So when he was in grade school, he went about a month without a phone because he broke his phone. We're like, we're not getting to you until this date and
Right.
everything.
Right.
But he basically then it was in the summer. He went a month without because it was all through I forgot what at that time it might have been Snapchat or something like
Yeah.
that. That's how they communicated. So
I know.
he didn't know when people were going out or anything. So we were
I
kind of
know.
in this pickle. We're like, can't use social media. It's not good. But then he didn't have any social interaction because he didn't have it. So
I know.
any suggestions on that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the research shows that there's like this new push. I don't know if you've ever heard of wait till 8. So it's this movement of wait till 8th grade in order
Okay.
for kids to get a phone. And more importantly, to start using it in a way like social media or something like that. You need buy-in from the class or the school because if your kid's the only one waiting, then, everybody else is doing that. So there's kind of that push. But the research does show that, social media can have a negative impact, especially earlier that they encounter it. My daughter's in 7th grade. She does not have a phone yet. We're trying to hold off, but she's one of the few that don't.
Yeah.
Okay. They do have these new phones, like the Gab phone, where it doesn't
I
have
think
any
I'm pretty
social
familiar
media
with
and
them.
it doesn't
Yeah.
have internet. But, it's a difficult situation. I think as a parent, you need to decide, where you lie in that. And every parent's different. I'm not here to say this is good or this is bad, but I will tell you that the longer you can wait, the research shows for development, the better that it is because they start making those comparisons. We know that social media, everybody's posting their best self or, filtering this or doing that. And,
Mhm.
adolescents make comparisons all of the time. That is the time of age where they're making comparisons. They're very egocentric. So they think everybody sees the world that they do. They compare themselves. They think everybody's looking at them when nobody really cares, right? And then also monitor it. I mean, your kid and what your kid's going to want to do or not do. Some parents just have no idea what, their kids are doing online and whatnot. So I'm in that camp of the wait till that. I really encourage actual interaction was really good for development. So the more you can do that, like, hey, let's make a play date or, let's do that or let's hang out at, this place, at the Starbucks or wherever people are going nowadays.
The play date idea reminds me of something that you talked about a little bit in the book about
Yeah.
structured versus unstructured play. And I remember, when I was growing up, when we were growing up, it was a lot more unstructured play. It was, hey, go out, we played baseball, we played ditch. As soon as the street lights came on, that's when we were home. But I mean, and I'm guilty of it with my kids. It's very, very structured. It's like, dance or baseball practice or whatever it was. It was very, very structured. So
Yeah.
what do you think about that?
Yeah.
Is unstructured, structured? What's better? What's worse? Again, is it both? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I do think we definitely have more structured play. The current research shows actually we really want to have unstructured play for kids and for teens. And I think we never thought about it before. I think sometimes people think play is the answer when you have nothing else to do. It's like, oh, we did these 5 things. Now go play because we don't have anything to do. But if you think of play as an important part of development, I think then you kind of look at it in a different light of something that we want to make sure we make time for. And we know that unstructured time or play or whatever people want to call it, social interaction is very important. It helps them build, social skills. It actually is a buffer against negative stressors. It improves our executive functioning, which is like our ability to learn and organize. And it also allows us to have to regulate our self and emotions. Think about it. When you're with a peer and it's unstructured and you're playing a game or you make something up, if somebody cuts in front or somebody doesn't take a turn, they're going to put you in your blitz, to be able to do that. So you're learning like what's acceptable and what's unacceptable. Your parent or your teacher could tell you all day long what's unacceptable or acceptable, but until you actually are in that situation, you're really learning from that. Kids will be like, I'm bored, what do you do? And I think that's okay. Like, parents are quick to jump in and go, we'll do this, or what about this, or we have this today. And I think, to be honest, just let them figure it out, to like take a step back. I'll give you an example in class. So when people are new professors, silence is like deadly in a classroom, right?
Sure.
You ask a question and nobody answers. And so they're quick to give an answer or re-ask or, do something. And I don't mind silence, so I'll be sitting there and ask something. And if they don't know, I'm giving them time to think. Giving them time. If it's an unfamiliar subject, we might need a little bit more time. So for kids, think about how they're not as fast processors as we are. So we ask them a question. We want the answer right away, but give them time to think about the answer.
Yeah.
So same thing with play. If they're bored, give them time to think about what they can do. And for younger kids, you might want to have a room or a variety of things for them to play with. For unstructured social interactions, they find the seat cushions and they'll make a fort or whatever it is. I know it's, uncomfortable for a lot of parents, but I think if we could just, give them this time and wait a little bit to see what they come up with, I think that's very helpful for children because we want them to do that. We want them to develop those skills, to be able to utilize their time and not have somebody always tell them what they should be doing with their time.
I remember when my kids were littler, Linda would go away. She would do a girls' weekend. So I would wait till this weekend because I didn't want her to go through this torture. But it was a electronics detox weekend. So when Elizabeth was young, I used to unplug the TV and I'm like, oh, the TV's not working. By the time she was like 5, she's like, oh, Dad, look, here, the plug. We just need to plug this back in.
Right.
Uh,
Exactly.
But as I got older too, again, it was all right, no phones for the whole weekend. And the first like 2 to 3 hours, it was miserable and
Yeah, it's brutal.
complaining and everything like that.
Yeah.
But then we just got creative. I remember one time we basically were taking marshmallows and throwing them. One person was
Yeah.
upstairs and we were throwing marshmallows trying to get them in each other's mouths and stuff.
Yeah.
And you would come up with just
Right.
these really creative stuff.
Right.
It was
And
fun.
you know what?
Yeah.
Like daydreaming and thinking about things actually promotes creativity. And
Sure.
creativity, geez Louise, if we didn't have creativity, we wouldn't have half of the technology and innovations that we have. So I know it's uncomfortable sometimes for some parents, or we always want something to do, but I think it's a good thing to just kind of let them try to figure it out.
Yeah. I wanted to jump back to something you mentioned, monitoring. So, monitoring your kids' phones and things
Yeah.
like that. And this is I've had debates with other parents on this. How much is too much? Because, I know some parents who like find my friends and the kids are in college now and they're like checking where they, how
So-
much is too much?
So you're saying that my mom should not have me on Find My Friends?
Actually, I'm
at
worried about
38.
you having mom and watching where mom is.
Oh,
That's
right.
where-
Oh, yeah. I forgot. I put that on her phone. That's how she happened.
Yeah. I think, depending on the age, I will tell you, I think you can monitor too much. I do think because you want to set up trust and rapport with your kids, even early on. Even when they're little, you want to establish a trust that knowing that you can go in and do stuff, but you're not going to unless you feel like that there's something they need to do. I think this comes back to nowadays, parents, the way that they parent. When we were, let's say, 20, and people are 20 now, they seem so much younger at 20 than maybe when we did, right? The way that, they're parenting is that there's this kind of slow development in the sense. It's like, I hear all the time, well, they're only 18. they're only 18. I'm like, gee, I was 18 when I went to college too. And,
Right,
so,
right,
I mean,
right.
it's kind of like that. So I think there's more monitoring because of that. Then there's that potential lack of independence and making decisions.
Sure.
And that's something that can be detrimental. If you can't make a decision on your own, how are you going to do that when you have your own kids? You want to know that your kids are safe or whatnot.
Yeah.
But I think on some level, you have to just also trust your kids. I even said to my daughter who's 12, and even when she was 10, she was doing something. I said, I don't look at your iPad. Like I said I could because I have your, password over, but I don't.
Yeah.
And I said, so, I'm trusting you that you are not doing anything that
Yeah.
I wouldn't want you to do. And I told her, once you lose trust, it's really hard to earn
Yeah.
it back. So, I want to give the trust, but, you have to realize that we need to give that to them. I think parents always want their kids trust, like, oh, you to trust me. It's like, but we kind of have to trust them too. So, and make mistakes is part of life. And to be honest, sometimes that's the best way we learn. We learn more, I believe, from our mistakes than we do from our successes, to be honest,
Certainly.
So,
Certainly.
yeah.
Another question I get often is, especially today's, it seems like kids are kind of on their phones. So that's like safety to them. So really shy kids, it can be hard for them to make friends because everybody's got that protection of that
Yeah.
phone or that iPad,
Yeah.
whatever it is. For any parents out there, even teachers who might be working with shy kids, any
Yeah.
recommendation for them on how they can kind of build social interaction and make friends?
One thing I want to point out is, most people feel shy sometimes. So I think when shyness is, and to be honest, in our culture, as you get older, shyness is seen as a negative quality. But not all cultures view shyness in that manner. So in some cultures, shyness is seen as a very valuable trait or characteristic or, part of that. So I just, want to highlight that. But one of the things that I think that is really important is be a good role model yourself. There's a famous psychologist, most everybody knows, psychologist knows Albert Bandura. The psychologist before him always said, in order to learn, we need consequences. We need reinforcement. We need punishment. And he's like, I don't think, we can just learn by simply watching others. And he did a lot of research and studies. And the answer is yes, we can learn by watching others. We learn what to do and we can learn what not to do.
Yeah.
And the old adage, do what I say, not what I do.
Mhm.
They're doing what you're doing usually. So
Right.
I think first and foremost, be a good role model yourself. When you interact with somebody, you have confident social behavior. Your kids are going to see confident social behavior, putting others at ease, even if it's uncomfortable for you. And then the other thing I think is that a lot of times parents will kind of push them into stuff. I think, what you need to do maybe is find things that they enjoy or that they're interested in. They're
Sure.
more likely to reach out and do something versus they've never done this before. You put them in a gymnastics class, they have no idea what they're
Right.
doing, and
Right.
go make friends. It's like, and then I think you should be okay with very small steps, progress. Even if they just said hello to somebody and they normally don't do that, that's a win in my book. Or
Right.
maybe they joined a game for just a little bit of time and then they, got out of it. That's learning and that's developing skills. And then just reinforce them, give them praise when they do something that you deem that would be good. Like one of the things that I usually stress too is talk about behaviors rather than characteristics. So for example, you'll have parents, this is my messy kid or this is my, whatever kid.
Sure.
And then they see that as a characteristic versus a behavior or even a good one. Like, this is my smart kid, right? Well, what if they get a bad grade on a test or do
Right.
they
Yeah.
think they're
Yes.
smart anymore? So I think, highlighting behaviors, if they do well on a test, wow, you did so well on the test because you studied really hard. So with shyness, sometimes parents are like, this is my shy kid. And I'm thinking that, well, they're going to live up to that expectation then, right?
Right. Right.
So, oh, I'm shy. I don't need to do this or that. So I think if we can focus on behaviors, that's really helpful for kids in developing, especially children who might be a little bit more shy than others or less willing or slow to warm up in certain
Yeah.
groups. It's just the way you change your wording really matters. So when I, teach with my students, we work on that. Just these kind of little changes that you can make can really be beneficial for kids. The other thing is, I think, focusing on what we want to happen versus what we don't want to happen. So let me give you an example. the weather was really bad driving to work today.
Mhm.
So instead of saying, I don't want to get in an accident, I don't want to get in an accident, say, I would like to get to work safely. I'd like to get to work safely. I'd like to get to work safely.
Mhm.
So, kind of reiterating what you want to happen, especially that are good things versus you don't want bad things to happen. Because when we say things and focus on, even though you don't want it to happen, you're
Yeah.
focusing on accident or you're focusing on failing a test or not
Yeah.
passing or whatever. So I think making, again, that small change is really helpful. So when you're working with kids who might be slow to warm up in a social situation or maybe with technology or whatever it is, if we can focus on the positive and what we want to see versus what we don't want to see,
Sure.
can be helpful as well.
So we're going to hop into our final 3 questions. They're 3 questions that we ask every wonderful person that's on the show. So question number 1, a certain level of stress and anxiety is inevitable. And in many cases, it's a good thing if we want to achieve our potential. So what is something that causes you stress or maybe used to cause you a lot of stress? And how do you work through it?
To be honest, speaking in front of people is something that I'm not so comfortable with. So in the fall, I got asked to say the prayer for the graduates at graduation here at Lewis University. And it's an honor to be asked to do that. So while I was honored, I was also a little fearful of that because you have to sit on the stage with the platform party and, you're there the whole time. And so the way that I work through it is, some simple things. I take deep breaths. I know that sounds like it doesn't matter, but it really does. That physiologically changes your state, gets you to physiologically calm down. I do positive self-talk. So again, when I talked about that positive psychology, I can do this. I want to do really well versus I'm going to blow it. And then I try to be just prepared as possible.
Okay, so question number 2. We like to remind kids that failure is a necessary part of life. You've already touched on this, and it's something that at almost 38 years old, I remind myself, Jeannie, it's okay to fail. It's okay to fail. And even people as highly accomplished as yourself, you've had failures that you've probably had to work through. So can you share with us a failure that you've had in life and what it taught you or maybe what good came from it?
Yeah. So I think one of the things, just talk about academically, I think comes to mind is, Tom, we went to a big university, right? And that was a change, and in one of my courses I took, I'll never forget, I took a biology course and there was about 500 students in class. And I remember I got my first exam back and it was like a D or an F and I'd never gotten that before. And I was kind of shocked and I was worried that, am I going to be able to pass the class? What's going on? And, this is back in the day, there was no cell phones, there was no email to email. You had to go to the instructor during office hours. And so I did, and I went to the office hours and I asked the instructor, what can I do? And the instructor gave me helpful feedback and I utilized that feedback. And I ended up earning an A in the class, which you think, how can you go from that to that? Well, again, I learned that reaching help for help to somebody who can help you is very important. And also that while in some respects, some things might seem dire at the time, you can recover from it. And sometimes you can
Totally.
recover very well from that.
And especially now you being a professor, that's such a relevant story. I'm sure you've had kids that have been like, how did I get a D in this? And you're like, I've been there. I've been there and it's all good. Look where I am. It's all good.
Exactly. And I think having those things in class that are allowing for that is really important for students, knowing that if you don't do well in this one thing, it's not going to totally negatively impact your overall grade in the course later on. And I think developing that is really helpful for them.
Awesome. All right. So our last question, let's say a parent is tucking in their kid at night or a teacher or a coach has a couple minutes left in their class or practice, and they want to share a quick clip from this podcast with their kids. What is the main lesson that you want to leave with us with what they could play for their kids? What is that main lesson?
Main lesson would be twofold, be a good role model for your kid. It's nobody's perfect. So, I think we're all doing the best that we can and allow them unstructured time. It allows them then to develop those skills on their own. So I think if you can take one or two things and maybe make small changes, it would really be helpful.
Yeah. Small changes go a long way. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Awesome. Oh, Valerie, this was so great.
Valerie, thank you so much for being here. That was so fantastic. We really, really appreciate your time.
Thank you
I'm
for
gonna
having me.
I'm going to go look for those pictures.
We can find some
Okay.
prominent homecoming
Find
pictures.
'em. I'm going to email them to you.
Exactly. I shudder to think what we were wearing, but that's
I
okay.
know, yeah.
This was great. It was so great to see you both. Thank you for having me.
That was so much fun. I mean, truly, looking at her, I felt 6 years old again on your like prom night or homecoming night, one of your dances, and she's there with your friends. And I mean, that's so wild.
That was so cool. That was so great to see her again, to catch up and learn all this great stuff.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, she gave nuggets of knowledge there.
Yep. What was your favorite?
What I really liked is she said, choose, when talking to kids, choose their behaviors over their characteristics. And, she gave the example of, like, this is my messy kid, or this is my smart kid. Instead of saying that, use a behavior. And I thought that was so smart and made so much sense. I remember when I was student teaching 4th grade, and I had this little girl who was so, not to use a characteristic, but so smart. And I remember one time when she failed a quiz, and all the kids had failed the quiz. The reality was it was my fault. I didn't know fractions that well and wasn't teaching it very well. So I knew I had to reteach it, right? Because, whoopsies, my bad, sorry. Those children probably still can't do fractions to this day because of me. But I remember really most of the class did very poorly, and she was one of them. And her coming up to me and crying. She was so upset because she saw herself as the smart one. Even though it was I did not teach it properly. It was my doing the reason why she didn't do well. That fell so heavily on her because that's how she identified herself. And I think we see it with a lot of kids nowadays. And so I just love that idea of those behaviors. What did they do to get them to where they are? Because that's going to live in their head of not like, oh, I'm just not inherently smart. I work hard. So behaviors over characteristics. I'm going to remember that forever. What about you?
I love that. I love that as well. The thing that probably stood out for me besides that one, I mean, like you said, there was a lot in there. Just that the unstructured play piece. That's something that I probably failed at as a parent, because there was very much, hey, we're going to dance. As soon as we're done with school, we're going to dance. It was very, very structured. But and even as an adult too, I think I always have to have something to do, and I think it does. It kind of harms your creativity. So it's almost like to the point where if I'm bored, or a kid's bored and they say, "Hey, I'm bored," the answer's good. All right, just don't grab the phone, don't grab the iPad, just sit there and think. And and get creative. So I think that unstructured play is something that I would want to incorporate more in my kids' life. I wish I did, and I want to incorporate more in my own life too.
Totally.
Great stuff. Great stuff.
Well, happy last episode of season 1 of our Raising Resilient Kids podcast. I wish you would have gotten us a cake or something to celebrate.
That's a good idea. Maybe when I'm out there in July, I'll bring a cake and we can celebrate season 1 and start planning for season 2.
Oh, I like that idea, but don't bring it. I'm sure it doesn't travel well. We'll buy one here.
That's a good point. I definitely will do that. And I guess to our listeners out there, again, thanks for being with us for season 1. We'd love to hear your feedback of what you'd like to hear from season 2, maybe what you liked from season 1. Let us know, wherever in the YouTube comments and social media comments, if you want to leave a review, to let us know what you're hoping to learn from season 2. So we hope everybody has a great summer, and we'll see you in September. Thanks again, sister, for doing this with me.
Thank you, brother. Bye, everyone. See you in September.
The Raising Resilient Kids podcast is sponsored by Happy You're Here, educational, safe, and joyful videos for kids. Through music, visuals, and sound, your baby, toddler, and preschooler will learn about letters, numbers, and so much more. Happy You're Here is quality screen time that both kiddos and their adults can feel good about. Head to www.youtube.com/@SoHappyYouAreHere to check it out, or click on the link in the show notes.
The Raising Resilient Kids podcast is also sponsored by the Resilient Youth Program. If you're a parent, teacher, or school administrator who wants to incorporate a proven resiliency building program into your school's curriculum, then the Resilient Youth Teach the Teacher program is exactly what you need. This curriculum brings coping skills and life management tools into the school environment to help students better manage daily stress and positively impact their academic performance, mental health, and well-being. For more information, visit the Resilient Youth Teach the Teacher website in the show notes or at www.smarthwp.com/RY4teachers. It's www.smarthwp.com/RY4teachers. The Raising Resilient Kids podcast is produced, hosted, and edited by Sister Brother Team, Jeannie and Tom Klashevitz. Do you have a question you would like answered by one of our expert guests? If so, visit www.smarthwp.com/Raising Resilient Kids podcast. Thanks for listening.